Welcome back to Midnight at WolfCloud Station. I'm your host, Sierra Sterling. Somewhere beyond mile marker 47, there is a stretch of asphalt that local authorities would rather you forget. It is a long, desolate ribbon of road cutting through the heavy timber of West Milford, New Jersey. They call it Clinton Road. 10 winding, treacherous miles of cracked pavement running almost entirely through the untamed isolation of the Newark Watershed. It is a place where the trees seem to lean inward, interlocking their branches to block out the moonlight. A place that has, for over a century, acted as a magnet for the darkest impulses of the human psyche, and perhaps something else entirely. Tonight, we look at a highway that is completely saturated in fear. A place where the line between urban legend and true, documented horror is not just blurred. It is erased entirely, leaving only the cold truth of what happens in the dark. If you drive this road at midnight, the first thing you will notice is the silence. It is not a peaceful silence. It is a heavy, expectant quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring and your heart beat just a fraction faster. The geography itself is oppressive. The Newark Watershed comprises tens of thousands of acres of heavily forested, undeveloped land designed to protect the water supply. But this vast, unmonitored wilderness also serves to insulate Clinton Road from the outside world. There are no streetlights, there are no houses. There is only the road, the trees, and the blinding glare of your own headlights reflecting off the dense fog that rolls off the Clinton Reservoir. The road has long been a subject of intense dread. Even as far back as the early 20th century, travelers warned of this specific corridor. In 1905, a local historian named J. Percy Crayon wrote extensively of the area, stating that it was never advisable to pass through the 5-mile woods after dark. Tradition, he noted, told of bands of robbers and counterfeiters, to say nothing of the witches that held their nightly dances and carousels at Green Island. Crayon wrote that the ghosts that made their appearance in such frightful forms were often more terrifying to the peaceful inhabitants than the wild animals or even the indigenous tribes that traversed the woods. This is not a modern internet myth born on a message board. This is a foundational, generational terror woven into the very dirt of Passaic County. One of the most persistent legends of Clinton Road centers on a narrow stone bridge spanning the dark, rushing waters of the Clinton Brook, down near the reservoir. Locals refer to this treacherous bend as Dead Man's Curve. The story goes that a young boy, playing too close to the edge, or perhaps struck by a reckless driver in a heavy truck, fell into the freezing water and drowned. The currents dragged him under before anyone could reach him. According to the lore that has permeated the region for decades, if you stand on that bridge at the stroke of midnight and toss a coin into the water, the spirit of the boy will return it to you. Sometimes he places it gently on the asphalt behind you while you aren't looking. Other times, he hurls it violently back at your vehicle, leaving deep dents in the metal. Some who have ventured out to the bridge report peering over the stone parapet into the black water, only to feel a pair of cold, unseen hands violently shove them toward the edge. The legend is so potent that the asphalt around the bridge is often littered with tarnished quarters, left by terrified teenagers daring the ghost to manifest. But the boy in the water is not the only phantom said to patrol the darkness of West Milford. Motorists navigating the tight, blinding curves of Clinton Road frequently report encounters with a terrifying vehicular anomaly. They describe a pair of floating headlights, unattached to any visible chassis, suddenly appearing in the rearview mirror out of the absolute blackness. The lights close the distance with impossible speed, riding the bumper of the terrified driver, chasing them relentlessly to the end of the road before simply vanishing into thin air. Some claim it is the ghost of a young girl driving a Camaro who perished in a fiery wreck in 1988, asserting that merely mentioning her name while driving the road at night is enough to trigger a manifestation. Others say it is a phantom pickup truck, a remnant of the hit-and-run driver who supposedly killed the ghost boy at the bridge, doomed to eternally patrol the woods in a state of purgatory. The local police chief once remarked to a reporter that it is a long, desolate stretch that simply makes the imagination go nuts. When you are surrounded by nothing but towering trees and inky blackness, your mind will scramble to put a face on the fear. Further down the road, Hidden just out of sight within the encroaching foliage sits a conical stone structure that has fueled nightmares for generations. Covered in thick green moss and surrounded by a high, rusting chain-link fence erected by the Newark Water Department, this towering, ancient-looking monument was long rumored to be a Druidic temple. Late-night trespassers whispered of horrible rituals, of blood sacrifices and dark chants echoing off the stone, claiming that horrible things would come to pass for any intruder who looked too closely or arrived at the wrong time. The truth, while less supernatural, is a testament to the area's forgotten industrial past. This structure is actually the Clinton Furnace, a massive iron smelter built in 1826 by a man named William Jackson. Powered by the flow of the Clinton Brook, it processed iron ore from local mines at Ringwood and Hibernia. The furnace is 29 feet wide at the base and 40 feet high, an imposing monolith of 19th century engineering. But operations stopped just over a decade later in 1837. Now it stands as a rotting monument to a dead industry. Added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1976, but serving primarily as a hollow canvas for the human imagination to project its deepest fears of the occult. But as we will soon see, the true horror of Clinton Road does not require ghosts or ancient druids or phantom trucks. The extreme isolation that breeds these myths also attracts a very real, very dangerous human element. When a road is entirely devoid of streetlights, cameras, and witnesses, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a utility for those who need things to disappear permanently. The folklore acts as a smokescreen, a protective barrier of superstition that keeps the curious away, leaving the woods wide open for the real predators. If you leave the asphalt of Clinton Road and venture directly into the dense, suffocating embrace of the 5-mile woods, you will find profound scars upon the landscape. The trees here do not just hide bodies. They hide a bizarre, fractured history. In 1905, a wealthy financier named Richard James Cross decided to conquer this wilderness. He poured an estimated $1.5 million, a staggering fortune at the time, equivalent to tens of millions today, into building a sprawling, magnificent estate on 365 acres of wooded glens and farmland. It was a 3-story, 40-room stone behemoth that loomed over the pristine 77-acre waters of Hanks Pond. The estate boasted a tennis court, a boathouse, carriage houses, and sprawling verandas that overlooked 2 lakes. Each room featured its own fireplace. It was an oasis of extreme privilege dropped directly into the middle of the unforgiving wild. The Cross family called the place Bearfort, but history remembers it as Cross Castle. But exorbitant wealth cannot buy permanence. Richard Cross died in 1917, barely a decade after his architectural marvel was completed. His family, perhaps overwhelmed by the sheer isolation of the estate, sold the entire property to the city of Newark in 1919 for a mere fraction of its original cost. The city stripped the grand home of its valuable materials and left the massive stone shell to rot in the elements. In the 1940s, a massive fire gutted the remaining wooden infrastructure, leaving only the towering, skeletal stone walls rising like broken teeth from the forest floor. It was during this long, slow period of decay that Cross Castle became the dark, beating heart of Clinton Road's mythology. The towering ruins, swallowed by creeping vines and isolated miles from civilization, became a pilgrimage site for thrill seekers, outcasts, and rumor has it, the occult. The crumbling interior walls were soon covered in cryptic, overlapping graffiti. Visitors reported seeing the official Lex Satanicus, the Lavean Church of Satan's Code of Conduct, scrawled meticulously across the masonry in areas that were supposedly inaccessible without scaffolding. The stories quickly escalated from teenage trespassing to claims of organized Ku Klux Klan rallies and dark satanic rituals held within the roofless, starlit halls. People who visited the ruins began reporting severe physical ailments, sudden seizures upon crossing the threshold, unexplained bruising appearing on their arms hours later, and the sound of disembodied chanting caught on the wind. The energy of the place was undeniably foul, a psychic sinkhole drawing in the region's collective paranoia. It became such a dangerous nuisance and public liability that in 1988, the city of Newark finally brought in heavy machinery and demolished the remaining stone walls, crushing the castle back into the earth. But you cannot bulldoze a legend. Hikers who visit the site today, walking over the scattered foundation stones, still report overwhelming feelings of dread, as if the soil itself absorbed the darkness of the decades. And if ruined castles and occult panic weren't enough to cement the road's reputation, the ecosystem of West Milford possesses its own entirely bizarre twist. In 1972, the entertainment giant Warner Brothers opened a massive drive-through safari park nearby called Jungle Habitat. They brought in lions, Siberian tigers, elephants, and troops of monkeys, attempting to create an exotic wonderland right in the middle of northern New Jersey. The park drew over 6 million visitors during its short lifespan, but it was plagued with issues from the very start. Visitors were attacked by apex predators. Animals allegedly escaped into the surrounding wilderness. By 1976, the park was permanently shuttered, a massive financial failure that left behind miles of paved trails, abandoned tram cars, and empty cages to decay in the woods. But locals firmly believe that not all the animals were rounded up when the gates locked. For decades, drivers on Clinton Road have reported seeing strange, unidentifiable creatures darting across the asphalt in the dead of night. There are continuous sightings of rogue macaques and baboons surviving in the deep woods, crossbreeding into strange, feral hybrids that watch cars pass from the high branches. And then there is the hellhound. Often referred to by locals as Wolfie, this creature is described as a massive, unnatural canine with glowing red eyes, capable of running fast enough to keep pace with a speeding car, throwing itself violently against the side panels of terrified motorists' vehicles. Some believe it is a remnant of a secret albino wolf dog experiment conducted deep in the woods. Others claim it is a demonic entity summoned from the ruins of Cross Castle, and some say it is simply the ghostly guardian of the drowned boy at the bridge. Whatever the truth, the psychological layering of Clinton Road is immense and suffocating. You have the geographic isolation of the watershed, the ruined infrastructure of a dead castle, the persistent rumors of satanic cults, and the bizarre legacy of an abandoned exotic zoo. It creates an atmosphere of total, immersive paranoia. When your mind is primed to see monsters, you will see them in every shadow. The shadows of Clinton Road were so thick with myth that they became a blind spot. And the ultimate tragedy of Clinton Road is that the people staring into the woods looking for hellhounds, druids, and ghosts were entirely oblivious to the very real monster who was driving right past them, with a dead body in his trunk. On May 14th, or by some accounts, May 18th, 1983, a cyclist was pedaling down the desolate stretches of Clinton Road. The air was thick, the woods were quiet, and the road was entirely empty of vehicular traffic. But as the cyclist passed a particularly dense wooded section of West Milford, a large, dark shape on the side of the road caught their eye. It was a turkey vulture. The massive scavenger was tearing violently at something large, wrapped tightly inside a heavy green garbage bag that had been unceremoniously dumped in the brush. Curiosity gave way to sheer, paralyzing horror when the cyclist realized exactly what the bird was consuming. It was a human corpse. Law enforcement arrived to find a gruesome scene that ripped away the supernatural veil of Clinton Road and replaced it with a stark, brutal reality. The body belonged to a man named Daniel Deppner. When the medical examiners performed the autopsy, the cause of death was officially listed as undetermined. But the signs of foul play were unmistakable. Deppner had been strangled. More disturbingly, examiners noted distinct pinkish spots on his skin. A classic telltale indicator of cyanide poisoning. The authorities surmised that Deppner had likely been incapacitated, poisoned, strangled to finish the job, wrapped in plastic, and discarded on the most notorious, isolated road in the state. Daniel Deppner was not killed by a ghost. He was not sacrificed by druids at the iron furnace, and he was not mauled by a hellhound escaped from jungle habitat. He was a victim of a very real, very methodical monster. His name was Richard Leonard Kuklinski, though the world would soon come to know him by a much colder moniker, the Iceman. Kuklinski was a towering, heavily built man, standing 6'5" and weighing nearly 300 pounds. To his family and neighbors in the quiet New Jersey suburb of Dumont, he was a regular family man. He had a wife, Barbara, he had 3 children, and he threw neighborhood barbecues. But Richard Kuklinski lived a sprawling, psychopathic double life. He was a prolific contract killer and an enforcer for the Gambino crime family, with a murderous career spanning over 30 years. His origins were steeped in violence. Abused violently by his alcoholic father, who eventually abandoned the family after beating Richard's brother to death, and routinely beaten by his strict mother, a young Kuklinski learned early that it was better to give pain than to receive it. He claimed to have committed his first murder at the age of 13 or 14, beating the leader of a neighborhood gang, Charlie Lane, to death with a wooden dowel. To prevent identification, the teenage Kuklinski then removed the boy's fingers with a hatchet and pulled his teeth out with pliers. From there, he graduated to a career in bootlegging Disney animated films and pornography, which brought him into contact with organized crime figures like Roy DeMeo. Kuklinski was a killing machine with no preference for method, making him incredibly difficult for law enforcement to track. He used handguns, crossbows, sawed-off shotguns, hunting knives, and explosives. But his true signature, the weapon that made him a phantom in the eyes of forensics, was cyanide. He would administer it via injection, slip it into a victim's food like baked beans or a hamburger, or use a nasal spray bottle to spray it directly into a target's face on a crowded street, walking away as the victim collapsed from what looked exactly like a massive heart attack. He headed a burglary ring with associates Gary Smith, Percy House, and Daniel Deppner, the very man found rotting on Clinton Road. When Kuklinski felt his associates were becoming a liability, or when he simply didn't want to pay them their share, he eliminated them without hesitation. Kuklinski earned the nickname, the Iceman, for his brilliant, chilling method of confounding police investigations. In 1981, a man named Louis Masquet disappeared after meeting with Kuklinski to purchase videotapes. Masquet's body was not found until 15 months later, dumped in Rockland County, New York. When the medical examiner analyzed Masquet's partially decomposed remains, they found something impossible: intact ice crystals inside the cellular tissue. Kuklinski had stored the body in an industrial ice cream truck freezer for over a year before dumping it, completely disguising the actual time of death and rendering standard forensic timelines utterly useless. This was the caliber of predator using Clinton Road. For a killer like Kuklinski, a 10-mile stretch of unlit, unpatrolled highway surrounded by thousands of acres of dense watershed forest was a geographic jackpot. He knew the legends. He knew people avoided the road at night for fear of ghosts and Satanists. He relied on the superstitions of locals to keep prying eyes away from the tree line where he disposed of his garbage bags. The ghosts of Clinton Road were, in a very real way, Richard Kuklinski's unwitting accomplices. They guarded his secrets. Kuklinski's reign of terror resulted in an estimated personal body count ranging from a confirmed handful of convictions to over 200 victims, depending on his own grandiose claims in later interviews. He would kill for money, he would kill to cover his tracks, and he would kill simply because someone irritated him in a Manhattan bar. For decades, law enforcement could not touch him. He left no witnesses. He left no forensic trail. And anyone who could testify against him ended up in a 55-gallon drum, a crushed car, or wrapped in plastic on a haunted highway in West Milford. But even the Iceman couldn't stay frozen forever. The discovery of Daniel Deppner by that lone cyclist was a thread, and law enforcement was finally ready to pull it. The discovery of Daniel Deppner on Clinton Road was a critical mistake by Richard Kuklinski. It established a physical link in a chain of disappearances that had baffled authorities for years. The New Jersey District Attorney, the FBI, and the ATF formed a massive joint task force, spearheaded by investigators like Robert Carroll, to finally hunt the Iceman. But how do you catch a master killer who leaves no physical evidence and systematically murders all of his accomplices before they can talk? You have to give him a target he can't resist. You have to beat him at his own terrifying game of cat and mouse, infiltrating a deceptive operational pattern that had kept him free for 3 decades. Enter Dominic Polifrone. Polifrone was a highly experienced, utterly fearless undercover agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. His assignment was nothing short of suicidal. He was tasked with infiltrating Kuklinski's criminal circle, gaining the trust of a man who literally killed people for looking at him the wrong way. Polifrone adopted a deep undercover legend, posing as a connected mobster with extensive resources, and most importantly, access to pure cyanide. At the time, Kuklinski was spiraling. Subsequent investigations indicated he was carrying out up to 7 murder plots simultaneously. He had killed his previous chemist source and desperately needed a new supply of the poison to eliminate a few remaining associates who he feared might cooperate with the task force. Polifrone spent months patiently hanging around known criminal haunts, slowly drawing Kuklinski's attention. When they finally connected, the recordings Polifrone secretly captured were absolutely chilling. In tape-recorded conversations, Kuklinski comfortably described his diverse methods of killing. He boasted of his creativity in hiding bodies, the freezing techniques that gave him his nickname, and the terrifying efficiency of cyanide in a nasal spray bottle that could kill in just a few minutes. The psychological tension of these meetings was astronomical. During these meets, Polifrone had to sit inches away from a 300-pound serial killer who could deploy a lethal dose of cyanide in seconds, and unknown to the task force until later. Kuklinski was perfectly comfortable discussing these murders because he fully intended to use the cyanide to kill Polifrone himself, right after he delivered the product. The trap was finally sprung on December 17, 1986. Polifrone arranged a high-stakes sting, delivering a package of fake cyanide to Kuklinski under the guise of a planned hit on a wealthy drug buyer. Kuklinski took the poison and told Polifrone he had to go home briefly. He was driving back toward the meet when the task force finally moved in. Heavily armed agents blocked the street, swarming Kuklinski's vehicle and dragging the towering killer from the driver's seat. Inside his car, they found the fake cyanide neatly prepared in 3 egg salad sandwiches. Intended for the buyer, for Polifrone, and for the accomplice who was supposed to help move the bodies. The Iceman was finally on ice. In 1988, relying heavily on Polifrone's testimony and the recorded tapes, Richard Kuklinski was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to consecutive life terms at Trenton State Prison, making him ineligible for parole until the age of 110. He spent his remaining years giving boastful, chilling interviews to psychiatrists, criminologists, and HBO documentary crews, cementing his legacy as one of America's most brutal killers. He died in the prison wing of St. Francis Hospital in Trenton on March 5, 2006, at the age of 70. Suspiciously, his death occurred just before he was scheduled to testify that former Gambino underboss Salvatore Gravano had hired him to kill a police officer, though an autopsy officially claimed natural causes. With Kuklinski gone, the shadow over Clinton Road shifted once again. The police tape was taken down. The headlines faded into microfilm, but the road itself remains, winding its way through the dense, unwelcoming trees of the Newark Watershed. When we look at the legacy of Clinton Road, it forces us to confront an incredibly uncomfortable truth about human nature. We love to tell stories about ghost boys returning coins, about phantom trucks chasing teenagers, and Druidic temples hidden in the brush. We love to imagine hellhounds prowling the woods and demonic cults chanting in the ruins of Cross Castle. We invent these supernatural horrors because, fundamentally, they are safe. A ghost cannot truly hurt you. A phantom truck cannot actually run you off the road. These legends are a psychological buffer, a way for our minds to process the overwhelming, oppressive isolation of the deep woods without confronting the reality of what men do to each other in the dark. But the real horror of Clinton Road was never supernatural. The real horror drove a mundane sedan, wore a family man's smile, and dragged garbage bags into the tree line while the rest of the world was looking for ghosts. The legends of West Milford served as the perfect, unintended cover for a flesh and blood monster. Richard Kuklinski utilized our fear of the dark to hide his sins. And while the Iceman is dead, the 5 Mile woods are still out there, silent and waiting. So the next time you find yourself driving down a desolate stretch of road, miles from the nearest streetlight, surrounded by nothing but towering pines and absolute darkness, and you feel that sudden chill crawling up the back of your neck, don't look for ghosts in the trees. Look at the car driving behind you. Keep the doors locked. Keep the volume low. Tonight's file is open. This episode of Midnight at WolfCloud Station was written and produced by Samuel Jimenez. If you have a story of your own, a local legend, or a case you want us to cover, we want to hear from you. Email us in the dark at midnight@wolfcloudstation.com or visit wolfcloudstation.com. If tonight's episode gave you chills, take a moment to leave a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss what's waiting in the shadows. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay safe out there.